The archivist asked me to confirm that my husband had inherited my journals after my death. I told her he had not inherited anything, because I was alive. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I checked the dashboard clock, as if time might explain the question. Then she said, very carefully, "Are you Rachel Mercer?" I was sitting in my car outside the printing plant where I managed quality control, eating a turkey sandwich between shifts. The call had come from a number in Missouri that I did not recognize, and I almost let it go to voicemail. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Lena Brooks from Special Collections at Blackridge University. She said a donor had sent 6 handwritten journals, personal letters, photographs, and a green wool scarf for a proposed literary collection. My current cell number was written inside the front cover of the oldest journal with the words, "If found, call Rachel." Lena had expected an executor or relative to answer. According to the donor paperwork, Rachel Mercer had died in a winter highway accident 8 years earlier. "I'm Rachel Mercer," I said again. "I'm 44. I'm at work. Who sent you my journals?" Lena did not answer immediately. She asked me to describe them. I told her the covers were black cloth, except for one blue spiral notebook from the year my sister Mara died. I told her my handwriting leaned left when I wrote too fast and that the green scarf had belonged to Mara, not me. Lena asked whether my husband was Evan Mercer. I said yes. She exhaled once, quietly, and told me the accession would be frozen while the university reviewed ownership and donor representations. She could not send me the full file yet, but she could identify the donor because he had claimed authority over my property. Evan Mercer had submitted the materials under the professional name E.M. Vale. I had never heard that name. Lena asked whether I knew the book When the Road Goes Silent. I did not. She asked whether I could check that my journals were missing without disturbing anything else, then email her from an address she could document. Before ending the call, she said, "Mrs. Mercer, please don't confront anyone because of something I said until I confirm what we actually received." It was sensible advice. It also told me she believed there was something to confirm. I stayed in the car after the call ended. Evan and I had been married 11 years. He was 47 and worked as a safety trainer for a manufacturer that built commercial lifts and loading equipment. He traveled several weekends a year for what he called contract workshops. We had no children, a decision we had made together before we married, and our life was stable enough to feel unremarkable in the best way. We owned a brick ranch outside St. Louis, argued mildly about thermostat settings, and took turns cooking according to who got home first. Evan remembered to put gas in my car before storms. I handled our tax folder because he hated paper. There was no version of our marriage in which a university should have believed I was dead. I called my assistant manager and said I had a family issue. At home, I went straight to the basement closet. The journals had been in a gray storage tote beneath winter blankets. I had not opened it in at least 3 years, but I knew its weight and the strip of faded masking tape across the lid. The tote was still there. The blankets were folded on top. Inside, the space where the journals had stood was filled with old equipment manuals from Evan's office. Mara's scarf was gone too. I did not search Evan's desk or open anything that was not mine. I photographed the tote, the manuals, and the empty space. Then I emailed Lena from the address attached to my phone number and described what I found. Her reply came 11 minutes later, "Thank you. Do not dispose of or alter related material. University Council has been notified." I typed E.M. Vale into a search engine. The first result was a sparse author website with no hometown, employer, social account, or photograph on the home page. Every contact link routed through a speaking bureau. It described Vale as a widower, grief educator, and workplace resilience speaker whose essays had helped organizations respond to sudden loss. The biography said his wife, Rachel, died in a black ice collision outside Columbia 8 years earlier. Evan and I had eaten dinner together the night the biography claimed I died. I knew because the date was January 17th, the anniversary of Mara's actual accident. Mara had been 29 when a pickup lost control on black ice and crossed the median. She died at the scene. Evan and I had been married 3 years. He had sat beside me in my mother's kitchen, answered the phone when none of us could, and driven us to the funeral home. On the website, that death belonged to him. There were links to a book, 12 podcast interviews, conference programs, and an essay called The Last Green Scarf. I clicked it. The opening described a husband finding his wife's scarf hanging behind the laundry room door 6 weeks after her funeral. Mara's scarf had hung behind my mother's laundry room door. I was the one who found it. The essay changed the color of the walls and the name of the town, but it kept the loose thread near one end and the faint smell of the cedar chest where Mara stored winter clothes. Evan knew those details because I had written them in the blue journal. I bought the electronic edition of his book for $9.99 because I wanted a clean record of what was publicly sold. The author photograph appeared after the title page. It was Evan, wearing the navy jacket I gave him for our 10th anniversary. The name beneath it read E.M. Vale. The introduction thanked Rachel, whose absence taught me to listen. I had been upstairs doing laundry while he wrote me into an absence. I stopped reading and checked the tax return stored in our joint cloud folder. For the last 7 years, our accountant had reported side income under a general category called training in speaking. Evan told me it came from safety workshops for trade associations. The amounts ranged from $4,000 to $11,000 a year. They were not hidden from the return, but their source was. I had signed those returns believing the labels he gave me. The author website listed upcoming events in Kansas City and Louisville. One fell on a weekend Evan had marked as fall protection recertification on our shared calendar. Another event from the previous spring matched a trip he described as forklift training in Tulsa. I did not need access to his private accounts. The public programs showed the same dates. At 4:20 Evan texted that he was leaving work and asked whether I wanted him to pick up salmon. I looked at the message until the screen dimmed. I wrote back that I was not hungry and had a headache. It was the first lie I told him that day, and even that small one made my stomach turn. I needed a few hours in which he did not know what I knew. Lena called again just before 5. Counsel had authorized her to tell me the collection's proposed title, the E.M. Vale Papers and the Rachel Mercer Grief Archive. Evan had signed a donor questionnaire stating that he was Rachel Mercer's sole surviving spouse and that the journals and correspondence had passed to him after her death. The box also contained 42 printed emails between my account and his, family photographs cropped from albums in our hallway cabinet, and the scarf. The university had not catalogued or scanned anything. It would preserve the box as received until ownership was resolved. I asked why Evan was donating it now. Lena said his publisher was preparing an expanded 5th anniversary edition, and the archive would support research access and establish the history of his work. The donor inventory also included anonymous essays that predated the book contract by several years. She could not interpret them for me. At 5:32 I opened the earliest essay linked on Evan's site. It had been posted under the name Evan Vale 2 months after Mara died, years before any publisher was involved. The first line read, "My wife Rachel was killed on January 17, and the house has not made a normal sound since." The essay had 43 comments from strangers offering sympathy. Evan had answered every one as a grieving husband. By the time I heard his key in our front door, I knew this had not begun with an editor changing a few details. My husband had built an 8-year professional life around my death, and he had started building it while I was still learning how to live with my sisters. Evan came into the kitchen carrying salmon, asparagus, and the lemon cookies I liked from the bakery near his office. For one disorienting moment, the groceries made him look exactly like the man I had known that morning. He saw my laptop open on the table and asked whether the headache was bad. I had closed the book but left the author page visible. "Who is E.M. Vale?" I asked. The bag in his hand made a soft paper sound as his grip tightened. He set it on the counter and looked at the screen without moving closer. "Where did you get that?" "Blackridge University called me about my estate." His face lost color. He pulled out a chair but did not sit. "Rachel, this is not what it looks like." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because he had reached for the most ordinary sentence available. I asked whether the journals in the university box were mine. He said yes. I asked whether Mara's scarf was in the box. He said he believed so. Then he began talking about anonymity, composite storytelling, and the way publishers protect private families by changing circumstances. I stopped him and asked why a composite story required a signed statement that I was dead. Evan rubbed the heel of his hand against his forehead. He said the donor form was drafted too broadly and that the archivist misunderstood. I told him I had not mentioned the archivist's gender or title. He stared at me, realizing the mistake. He already knew who had called. "Lena is careful," he said. "She should have contacted me first. She called the number in my journal. I forgot that was there." He finally sat down. I remained standing. Evan said he had begun writing after Mara died because he could not process what our family had gone through. The anonymous grief forum where he posted had strict categories, and sibling-in-law loss did not fit. He wrote from the perspective of a widower to convey the intensity honestly. People responded. An editor later encouraged him to develop the essays. Each step felt small, he said, and by the time the book existed, the narrative had become separate from our real life. Separate? I asked. You used her scarf. You used my journals. You used my name. He said Rachel was common and that no reader could identify me. I turned the laptop toward him and showed his author photograph. Someone who knows you can identify you. Evan said a person would first need the pen name or a copy of the book, and most appearances were closed association events. His defense kept changing scale. It was private because no one knew us, harmless because not many people cared, professional because enough people did. I asked him to leave for the night. He said we should not make a permanent decision while I was shocked. I told him one night at a hotel was not permanent. He asked if I had called my mother. I had not, but the question told me he understood whose story he had taken. Pack a bag, I said. We'll talk after I know what is actually in that box. Evan did not argue about the house. He put the groceries in the refrigerator, went to our bedroom, and returned 10 minutes later with a duffel bag. At the door he said the book had helped people. I answered, that is not the first thing you should need me to understand. He left. I locked the door and sat on the kitchen floor because my legs had begun to shake. Over the next 3 days, I read the book once and only once. I made a table with 4 columns, published scene, actual source, changed detail, and person affected. It was not an attempt to prove every sentence false. Some chapters contained general observations Evan could claim as his own. The table was for the details that belonged unmistakably to my family. The funeral home director who kept calling my mother Mrs. Monroe was in the book, except he used Evan's surname. The lasagna our neighbor burned because she forgot to add water became a casserole delivered by Evan's brother. Mara's habit of hiding cash in paperback books became something Rachel did before she died. A voicemail my mother left me at 3:06 in the morning appeared almost word for word, addressed to Evan instead. The voicemail's actual audio was not in the archive inventory, but I had transcribed it in my journal. My private confusion, my anger at Mara for driving in bad weather even though the accident was not her fault, and my shame about that anger all appeared in the voice of a devoted husband. Evan had not merely borrowed an event. He had occupied my place inside it. The book also contained scenes that never happened. In one, the fictional Rachel asked Evan to promise he would make meaning from her death. In another, she told him he understood grief better than anyone she knew. Those inventions seemed designed to grant permission after the fact. On Friday, Lena sent a formal acknowledgement that I had asserted ownership of the journals, scarf, photographs, and correspondence. The university would not open the collection to researchers or transfer copies to the publisher. With approval from counsel, she attached the donor inventory and the pages of the questionnaire that described my materials. Evan had listed the journals as widower's inherited property, and the scarf as last personal garment retained after the accident. The green scarf was not only Mara's. My mother had knitted it for her during college. There was a repair near the fringe where Mom had matched the yarn badly and laughed about it for years. The thought of strangers studying it as evidence of Evan's invented marriage made me feel physically ill. I called Mom. June Monroe was 71 and still lived in the small house where Mara and I grew up. I drove there rather than explain by phone. She listened at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug she never lifted. I showed her the author page, the essay, and the inventory. She read the title "The Last Green Scarf" twice. "He asked me for that scarf," she said. Evan had told her 2 years earlier that I wanted it for a memory box but found it too painful to ask myself. Mom gave it to him in a grocery bag. I had never known. That detail expanded the betrayal again. Evan had not simply taken an object from our home. He had used my supposed grief to obtain it from my mother, then allowed both of us to believe the other had it. Mom wanted to call him. I asked her not to yet. She asked whether he had been with someone else during the trips. I said I did not know. The public evidence showed a second professional identity and a network that believed he was widowed. It did not prove a second romantic relationship. Mom said, "Isn't this already enough?" She was not asking whether it was enough to leave. She was reminding me not to shrink the harm just because it was not the harm I had expected. On Saturday I reviewed the shared tax folder with our accountant, not to accuse Evan of a crime but to understand what I had signed. The speaking income had been reported under Evan's social security number as independent training work. The expense descriptions were broad but ordinary: mileage, lodging, conference fees, printing, website hosting. Nothing in the returns named the subject of the talks. Our accountant had no reason to know. Gross income over 8 years totaled a little under $62,000. Much of it had paid for travel and production, leaving about $37,000 after expenses and taxes. Some had gone into our joint savings. The money was not a secret fortune. It was worse in a quieter way: I had benefited from it without informed consent, while believing Evan was teaching people how not to fall from loading docks. On Monday I sent written notices to the university and the publisher stating only verifiable facts. I was alive. I had not authorized donation or publication of my journals, emails, photographs, or Mara's scarf. I disputed the claim that Evan inherited them. I asked only that new publication and appearances pause while the facts were checked. The publisher froze the expanded edition, the speaking bureau removed 2 upcoming appearances, and existing copies stayed in circulation. Evan and I met Wednesday afternoon at a counselor's office he found through our health plan. I agreed because the setting gave us a time limit and a witness to whether he answered. He brought a folder of contracts, income statements, travel schedules, and email account information. He said I could review them without taking his phone. The schedules matched most of the trips on our shared calendar, but the event descriptions were false. There was no evidence of hotel rooms shared with another person, no romantic messages in the professional account, and no secret residence. I could not prove he had been sexually faithful. I could prove that an affair was not required to explain his second life. Evan seemed almost relieved when he said, "There was never another woman." I told him he did not get to present that as the whole truth. The counselor asked when the widower identity began. Evan blamed the editor again. I opened the essay dated 2 months after Mara's death. "This was 4 years before the book contract," I said. He looked at the date and then at the floor. The lie had reached its next limit. He admitted the widowhood story had been his from the beginning. What I still did not know was why he had kept feeding it after the first strangers stopped listening. The counselor asked Evan to answer that question without describing the audience, the publisher, or the good he believed the book had done. He sat with his elbows on his knees and stared at his hands. Finally he said that after Mara died, everyone asked how I was doing and almost no one asked how he was doing. He knew that was appropriate, because she was my sister, but he also felt invisible inside our grief. On the anonymous forum, he wrote one post as a widower because he wanted a kind of sympathy he did not believe he had earned as a brother-in-law. The response was immediate. Strangers called him brave. They asked how he got through mornings, how he slept, how he forgave the driver who crossed the median. There was no driver to forgive, I said. The pickup driver died too. Evan nodded. He had invented a survivor so he could write an essay about forgiveness. The first post led to another. He changed Rachel to a common fictional wife, then used my first name because, he said, it made the voice feel less artificial. When an online magazine offered $50 for an essay, he told himself the money made it professional rather than personal. When a small press approached him, he told himself changing towns and jobs protected us. When organizations invited him to speak, he told himself the audiences needed consistency. And when Blackridge asked for proof, I said, "You gave them my journals." He said the publisher wanted primary materials for the anniversary edition. Some readers and reviewers had questioned whether the memoir was too polished. The archive would establish that the emotional source was real. That sentence clarified the whole structure. Evan knew the public identity could not survive scrutiny without authentic grief behind it, so he supplied mine. He did not need strangers to believe every event happened exactly as written. He needed my journals, my sister's scarf, and our family photographs to make the invented widowhood feel legitimate. I asked whether he ever intended to tell me. After the archive was settled, he said. How would that make it easier? I thought if you could see the work preserved, you might understand it wasn't cheap. The counselor asked if he hurt himself. Evan covered his face. I felt anger rise, then settle into something colder. He had mistaken permanence for permission. The more institutions accepted the story, the more entitled he felt to ask me to accept it too. I asked who knew he was married to a living woman. His main employer knew he was married but knew nothing about the book. The publisher believed he had remarried several years after Rachel's death. Evan had told them his current wife preferred total privacy and did not use social media. Conference organizers knew a current wife existed but thought I was his second wife. He wore his wedding ring and never needed to hide it. In photographs, it confirmed both stories. At home, I was the wife he married 11 years ago. In the grief network, I was the quiet second wife who respected the memory of the first woman with my name. That was the human architecture I had not seen on the author page. Evan had not maintained another house or legal marriage. He had maintained two versions of me. One was dead and useful. The other cooked dinner, signed tax returns, and made his public credibility look mature rather than fraudulent. I asked whether he had ever shown anyone my photograph as the second wife. He had shared one group picture from a company picnic and identified me only as R. The conference organizer who handled his travel had sent me a holiday card once, addressed to Evan and R. I remembered asking who she was. Evan said she coordinated safety certifications. Even the harmless pieces had been translated between lives. I asked him to provide a list of every organization that had received my photographs, journals, emails, or family details. He agreed. I asked for the passwords to nothing. He could gather the records with his attorney and send them through mine. The counselor asked what immediate boundary I wanted. I said Evan could remain at the extended stay hotel until we decided how to divide access to the house. He asked if I was ending the marriage. I said I was ending the assumption that it continued while I investigated what he had made from it. 2 days later I met with an attorney who handled publishing and privacy disputes. She warned me against expecting one clean legal answer. I owned my physical journals unless I had given them away. Copyright in my words did not automatically transfer because Evan possessed the notebooks. Emails, photographs, and details of real events involved different rights and facts. A false memoir could create contractual or reputational issues for Evan, but my goal should determine the action. I said I wanted my property returned, the anniversary edition stopped unless my material was removed, and no further use of Mara's story. I did not want to spend years suing over every sentence. The attorney drafted narrow notices and requested preservation of records. The university agreed to return the 6 journals, scarf, original photographs, and printed emails after documenting the disputed accession. Evan consented in writing. His own drafts and correspondence remained under review because those belonged to him. The publisher cancelled the anniversary edition rather than separate authentic material from invented narrative on its deadline. It did not withdraw existing copies. The Speaking Bureau ended its representation after Evan provided a written statement admitting that the central bereavement in his biography had not occurred as described. His employer verified that he had used vacation days rather than company time and had not used its clients or credentials. It required a corrected outside work disclosure and kept him employed. The consequences were administrative before they were emotional: canceled dates, revised disclosures, and people asking Evan to explain sentences he had repeated for years. My mother wanted the publisher to print a public apology with Mara's full name. I understood the impulse, but I did not want my sister introduced to thousands of readers as the answer to a scandal. We asked for a correction that did not identify her. The publisher added a notice to the electronic edition stating that the author had acknowledged combining and misrepresenting material involving living family members and that the work should not be treated as factual memoir. Future printings were suspended. Some readers would never see it. Used copies would remain on shelves. Complete factual cleanup was impossible, and learning that early kept it from becoming the condition of my recovery. Evan sent me a list of 31 talks, 14 essays, 3 podcast series, and 9 organizations that had received some version of the story. The list was longer than I expected and smaller than the faceless empire I had imagined during the first night. 7 talks had fewer than 40 people. The largest podcast report showed thousands of downloads, but no record could tell me who finished it or remembered my name. I did not contact them individually. My attorney sent one notice to the publisher and one to the bureau, and those organizations notified their partners according to their own procedures. I refused to spend the next decade following the lie into every room it had entered. Evan began individual therapy. We met twice more with the counselor, not to restore the marriage automatically but to decide whether any shared future remained. He answered practical questions. The speaking income had not funded another relationship or hidden asset. The separate email account contained professional correspondence and messages from readers, including a few flirtatious notes he said he had not pursued. I saw no proof that he had. The absence of an affair did not reduce the scale of the deception. It changed its category. Evan had not chosen another woman over me. He had chosen a version of himself that required me to be both dead and compliant. In our third session, he apologized without mentioning the people he helped. He said he had spent years turning every doubt into a reason to continue, stopping would expose him, so the next essay felt necessary, the next talk made the previous one seem legitimate, the archive promised a permanent structure that no longer depended on his word. I knew the story would collapse if you ever saw it, he said. So I built it where I thought you never would. I asked why he used my real cell number inside the journal box. He said he had forgotten it was written there. There was no hidden wish to be caught, no final act of conscience. A practical mistake exposed him. That answer hurt, but I believed it. He had not chosen truth. Truth had called the number on the first page. At the end of the session, Evan asked if there was a process by which he could earn another chance. I told him there might be a process by which he became honest. I did not know whether I wanted to be married to the result. That evening Lena emailed to say my property was ready for collection. 6 journals, 42 printed emails, 23 photographs, and 1 green scarf would be released to me after I signed only for receipt. For the first time since her call, an institution was not asking me to confirm my own death. It was asking when I wanted my life returned. I drove to Blackridge the following Monday with my mother. The university was 2 hours away. Distance had helped, but the real barriers were the pen name, closed association events, and a website that never connected Vale to Mercer. Lena met us in a reading room with frosted glass doors. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with a pencil tucked through her hair and an expression that carried professional caution and personal embarrassment. She apologized for the call that started everything. I told her the call was the one part she did not need to regret. The box sat on a gray cart between us. Lena reviewed the inventory without dramatizing it. 6 journals. 42 printed emails. 23 original photographs. 1 scarf. Mom touched the repaired fringe and began to cry. Lena stepped out to give us privacy. I opened the blue journal to the first page and recognized the pressure mark from a pen I used at Mara's hospital identification appointment. A folded grocery receipt was still inside. Evan had quoted whole passages from those pages, but the physical notebook had not become his because he typed them elsewhere. I signed the receipt form, and Mom carried the scarf. We did not ask to see Evan's drafts or correspondence. His papers could document his decisions for lawyers and publishers. They did not contain an answer I still needed. During the drive home, Mom said she felt guilty for giving him the scarf. I reminded her that he had told her I wanted it. Trusting my husband was not a failure she needed to confess. She asked whether I would divorce him. I said I thought so, but I wanted to make the decision after the emergency phase ended. You don't owe him uncertainty forever, she said. No, I answered. But I owe myself a decision I won't spend years arguing with. Evan stayed out of the house for 4 months. We established temporary expenses through our attorneys and divided access in writing. He continued paying his share of the mortgage and insurance. I changed the password on my personal cloud storage and moved the journals to a safe deposit box for several weeks, then brought them home when I realized I was protecting them so thoroughly that I had made them inaccessible to myself. I did not install cameras or search the basement for more stolen history. Evan provided a final materials list and certified through counsel that he held no other originals. Certainty was impossible, but practical limits were not. We spent 3 months in discernment counseling. Evan did not minimize the duration again. He accepted that the public correction would remain attached to his name and that I would not help him write a redemption essay. He offered me all remaining royalties from the book. My attorney explained that accepting them could complicate how we characterized the income and might create an ongoing connection I did not want. We agreed instead that the existing funds would be included in ordinary marital accounting. I did not need symbolic ownership of money earned from a story I never approved. The question that ended the marriage was not whether Evan felt remorse. I believed he did. It was whether I could share an ordinary life with someone who had turned ordinary life into cover for 8 years. Every uneventful weekend had protected his speaking schedule. Every tax return had relied on a label I did not question. Every time he comforted my mother on January 17th, he knew he would later accept sympathy as the widower in her place. Remorse could change what he did next. It could not give me back the marriage I thought I had been living. In February I told him I wanted a divorce. We were sitting in the counselor's office, the same place where he first admitted the widower story was his. Evan asked whether the decision would be different if he never published again. I said publication was no longer the condition. I don't want to be the person whose continued presence proves you've changed, I told him. And I don't want to wonder whether every private thing becomes material when you feel unseen. He cried quietly. He did not call me unforgiving. A month later he posted a statement on his former author site. It said that his memoir and talks misrepresented a living spouse and used family experiences without consent. He was ending the Vale project and would not publish further work from those materials. He did not name Mara or ask readers to admire his accountability. The site remained online for 30 days so event partners could link to the correction, then became a plain page containing only the statement. Reactions were uneven. On the few public pages that linked to the correction, some readers felt deceived, some defended the book's emotional truth, and others said it had still helped them. I read the comments once, then stopped. I did not answer strangers. Their experience with the book belonged to them, my life did not belong to the book. We sold the house in May because neither of us could comfortably buy out the other. The sale was ordinary. There were inspections, a repair credit for the aging water heater, and 3 weeks of arguments about whether the basement walls needed paint. Evan took the dining set his parents gave us. I kept the blue sofa and the kitchen table. We split savings according to the mediated agreement, including the net speaking income still traceable in our accounts. His employer retained him after he updated his outside work disclosures. Blackridge kept no materials that belonged to me. The publisher kept its business records and Evan's contracts. The divorce was final 11 months after Lena's call. Evan and I did not become friends. We exchanged 2 emails about taxes and one about a photograph of his father that had ended up in my box. He continued therapy, as far as I knew, and moved into an apartment near his job. His public life became smaller, while his job and most private relationships remained intact. Watching that neither punished nor healed me. I was steady by deciding what he could no longer take from me. I rented a townhouse 15 minutes from Mom. The journals went on a shelf inside my bedroom closet, not in a vault and not on display. For months I could not open the blue one. When I finally did, I expected every page to sound contaminated by Evan's book. Instead I found grocery lists, notes about a leaking tire, an argument with my manager, and a paragraph about Mara laughing so hard at a terrible television commercial that soda came out of her nose. Evan had selected grief because grief gave him a clean narrative. My actual journal was untidy, repetitive, sometimes petty, and alive. That difference mattered more than any correction notice. The following January 17th, Mom asked if I wanted to visit the cemetery. We had done that some years and avoided it in others. I said no. We went to a diner Mara loved instead. My aunt joined us, along with Mara's closest friend, Denise. For 20 minutes Mom and Denise argued over whether Mara always ordered blueberry pancakes or French toast with too much powdered sugar. My aunt insisted she ordered eggs and stole from everyone else's plates. No one could prove the memory. No one needed to. The server asked whether we were celebrating something. Mom said, "We're remembering my daughter." There was no practiced pause after the sentence, no lesson about resilience, no audience waiting for meaning. The server said she hoped we had a good morning and refilled the coffee. We told stories that contradicted one another. We laughed more than I expected. On the way out, Mom looped Mara's green scarf around her neck. She had repaired the loose thread with bright red yarn instead of trying to match the old green. Evan would have turned that into a symbol. Mom said she used red because it was the only yarn in her sewing basket and the parking meter was running. That answer made me laugh in the cold. Some copies of When the Road Goes Silent still existed. Some people would always believe Evan had buried a wife named Rachel. I could not enter every room where that version of me had been introduced. I no longer needed to. Mara had been my sister. I was alive. Around the diner table, both facts were allowed to remain ordinary, complicated, and ours.